Montana Territory, July 1883. The sun was high and the church bells never rang. Evelyn Mae Mercer stood outside the white clapboard church just east of Helena, her hands frozen around a bouquet of prairie lilies. Dust clung to the hem of her ivory dress, and the heat pressed down on her shoulders like a weight she could not shake. Inside, the pews were full, the pastor waited, and the altar stood ready. But the groom, he was gone without a word, without a sign, without even a damn note. The murmurs started soft, like wind through dry grass. Then came the pitying glances, the women whispering behind gloved hands. Evelyn heard her cousin mutter something about a banker's son never staying true to a ranch girl. She felt the words more than she heard them, like a slap to the chest. Her throat burned, but she did not cry. She would not. She had already given him enough. Her father, Tom Mercer, stepped forward, eyes wide with helplessness. "Honey, we can go home. You do not have to. I am not going to cry over a boy who ran," she said, her voice steady, almost too steady. "Let them look, let them gossip." And they would. By sundown, every soul in Helena would know that Charles Whitford left Evelyn Mercer at the altar. She turned, bouquet still tight in her grip, and walked down the steps alone. The gravel crunched under her boots. Her veil fluttered loose in the wind. She did not look back. Down the hill, sitting atop a worn-out bay gelding, a cowboy watched her with something like quiet awe. His hat shaded his eyes and his shirt clung to his back from the heat. He hadn't meant to be there. He was only passing through, on his way to a broken fence job east of town. But the sight of that woman walking away from a church in her wedding dress, chin up and shoulders squared, it stopped him cold. He had known pain, but there was something in the way she held herself that made him forget his own. His name was Abram Vaughn. 28. Raised in Wyoming, orphaned by 16, and trying to keep his small cattle herd alive just outside Townsend. His debts were piling up, his barn roof leaked, and 2 of his steers had gone lame last week. But still, he stayed, he fought, because some men were just too stubborn to quit, and maybe he was tired of being alone. He climbed off his horse when she reached the edge of the road. "Miss," he said, removing his hat as she approached. "You all right?" Evelyn stopped. Her eyes flicked over him, tall, sun-burned, rough around the edges. Not a man who'd ever worn a suit, but something honest in the way he looked at her. "You always ask strangers that. Or just the ones in wedding dresses?" He let out a breath that might have been a laugh. "Only the ones holding flowers like they want to throw them at someone's head." Her fingers loosened on the bouquet. She looked down at the lilies, then back up. "I was going to marry a man who ran before the first hymn. I think I earned at least 1 throw." "I would not stand in your way," she studied him. "Do I know you?" "No, ma'am. Name's Abram Vaughn. I was just riding through when I saw you come out. Figured." "Well, figured you deserved more than silence." Evelyn looked past him, out toward the hills. The sky was too blue, too calm. It made her feel like she was the only broken thing in sight. "You got somewhere to be, Mr. Vaughn." "No," he said slowly. "Not until tomorrow morning." "Then ride with me," she said. "Just until sundown." He blinked. "You sure?" "I do not want to go home yet, and I do not want to be alone. Today was meant to be something else. I will not let it end with me sitting in a kitchen, crying into cake." A beat passed. Then he nodded. He helped her onto his horse, and they rode double away from the church and the stairs, out toward the open land. The wind caught her veil and tore it free, sending it tumbling behind them across the dry grass. They rode in silence at first, but it was not the kind that hurt. It was the kind that gave space. Abram guided the gelding up a ridge where the land opened wide into golden fields. Evelyn leaned back slightly against him, not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth of him. "You were going to marry him for love?" he asked, careful. "I thought so," she replied, "but not anymore. No, I do not think I ever really knew him." She turned her head slightly, catching his profile. "You ever been in love, Abram?" He shifted in the saddle, "not the kind that lasts." They stopped near an outcrop of rock and dismounted. Evelyn sat on a flat stone, tugging her boots off with a sigh. Abram tied the gelding and walked a few steps away, giving her space but close enough to talk. "Why were you really at that church alone?" she asked. "Came down to pick up a payment from a man who never showed. Figures. I am owed more than I will ever see. You a rancher, trying to be, land's dry, stock's thinner than it should be, but I am still standing." She looked up at him. "That counts for something." He met her eyes. "Do you want to cry?" "No," she said. "I want to forget him." He nodded slowly. Then extended his hand. She frowned. "What are you doing?" "Dancing," he said. "You were supposed to have a first dance today, were you not?" Her lips parted. "You are serious?" "I am offering. No music, no crowd, just you and me, and the sun not done yet." Something in her chest cracked open. She had not smiled all day. But now, something close to it touched her mouth. She took his hand. And there, in her torn dress and dusty boots, she let a stranger hold her gently as they moved in slow, stumbling steps across the dry grass. His hand was warm at her back, steady and sure. Her head found his shoulder without thinking. He did not ask for anything, did not press. He just held her like he understood what it meant to need someone even just for a few quiet minutes. By the time the sun dipped low, they were still there. Sitting close on the rock, her head resting lightly against his arm. "I should go home," she said. "I can take you back." She hesitated. "What if I do not want to go back to being the girl left at the altar?" He turned to her, voice low. "Then do not. Be the woman who walked away and found something better." She looked up at him, really looked. "You offering that?" "I am offering whatever you need," he said. "Even if it is just a man to ride beside you until the hurt fades." Her hand found his. "No," she said softly. "I want more than that." He leaned in. Not rushed, not hard, just enough for her to meet him halfway, and when their lips touched, it was not a kiss of passion or fire, it was one of hope. Of something new blooming where something else had died. By the time the stars crept out, Evelyn Mercer was no longer a bride left behind. She was a woman who had taken a cowboy's hand before sundown and maybe, just maybe, found love instead. The mule bucked once when Evelyn climbed down. Abram caught her elbow not because she needed the help, but because he wanted an excuse to touch her again. The light was thinner now, slanting through the lodgepole pines surrounding the edge of his homestead. The ride from the ridge had gone quiet after the kiss, not from caution but from the kind of stillness that settles between two people thinking the same thing. Evelyn stepped forward, brushing her skirt as she took in the cabin. It was small, built from hand-hewn logs darkened by weather with a sod roof that sloped heavy toward the back. A broken wagon wheel leaned beside the door. The windows held no glass, only oiled parchment stretched tight and pinned. "You live out here alone?" she asked. Abram nodded as he untacked the gelding. "Just me and the land, and sometimes a coyote that thinks he owns the chicken coop." She walked slowly toward the steps, her boots leaving faint prints in the dry earth. "It's quieter than I expected." "I keep to myself," he said. "Neighbors are a mile off, and I like it that way." She turned, arms crossed, not defensive, just thoughtful. "So why bring me here?" He looked at her then, steady and unflinching. "Because you didn't ask to be stared at tonight. And I figured you'd sooner sit where no one's whispering your name like it's a prayer or a curse." Her shoulders softened. "You figured right." Inside, the cabin smelled of pine pitch and worn leather. A single cot pressed against the far wall, draped in a wool blanket that had seen better years. A battered stove waited in the corner, its pipe crooked slightly where it met the wall. A half-finished bridle hung from a nail, and a pair of spurs rested beside a worn Bible on the shelf. Evelyn didn't linger near the doorway. She walked right in, lifted a tin cup from the shelf, and turned toward the bucket near the hearth. "Is that well water? Cold, if you don't mind the iron taste." She dipped the cup, drank deep, then wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Better than coffee that's been sitting since sunrise." Abram removed his hat, setting it near the door. "You drink like someone who doesn't care what folks think." "I used to." She sat on the edge of the cot, eyes on her hands. "Then I tried to become someone easy to marry." He pulled up the only chair in the room and sat across from her. "And now, I think I'd rather be exactly who I was before I ever met him. The silence that followed was comfortable. He reached for the kettle and set it on the stove, lighting kindling with practiced ease. The flames caught slow, casting a glow across her face. She didn't flinch at the crackle or the heat. "You ever think about starting over?" she asked after a while. "I think about getting through the week," he said. "But a clean start, that's a rare thing. Most of us just carry what we can and leave the rest in the dirt." She nodded once. "Maybe that's what I'm doing, leaving something behind. You didn't bring much with you, just the dress." "And what's left of my pride?" He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "You can stay here tonight if you want. I'll sleep in the tack shed." "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "I know. I just want you to feel safe." She met his eyes, unblinking. "I feel more myself here than I have in weeks." He got up and pulled a folded quilt from the trunk beneath the shelf. It was patched in places, stitched neat and careful, a woman's hand in the work. He laid it on the cot beside her without comment. "I'll get some beans going. Might be a few biscuits left from this morning. I'm not hungry." "Then eat for company's sake." She smiled, small and real. "All right." They ate by firelight. No plates, just tin bowls and spoons and the sound of wind pressing against the walls. Evelyn finished first, setting her bowl aside, then stood and walked to the door. Outside, the stars had come down low, so bright they looked close enough to touch. Her arms wrapped around herself, not from chill, but from something deeper and quieter. Abram stepped behind her, his voice low. "You want me to take you home tomorrow?" "I don't know where home is anymore," she said, "but I know I don't want to go back to pretending." He didn't touch her, didn't reach. He just stood beside her, breathing the same air. "You don't have to decide tonight," he said. "Mornings are good for hard things." She turned toward him, and for the first time since the church, her eyes were clear. "What if I want to help fix that fence you mentioned?" His brow lifted. "You know fence work?" "I know how to hold a post steady and call a man a fool if he sets it crooked," he chuckled, soft. "Then I reckon that's just what I need." They stayed there, side by side, the cabin warm behind them and the world stretching wide ahead, nothing rushed, nothing forced. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. The sun had not yet cleared the pine line when Evelyn stepped outside, her bare feet pressing into the cool earth. Night dew clung to the grass, and the morning air carried that faint metallic chill that came before a hot day. She had slept curled beneath the old quilt, her dress folded neatly on the wooden chest, her dreams scattered but quiet. No whispers, no faces, just the hush of wind through timber and the steady creak of the cabin walls. Abram stood near the corral, sleeves rolled to the elbow, nailing a crossbeam back into place where one of the yearlings had battered it loose. He didn't look up when she approached, but his voice carried. "There's coffee. It's not strong, but it'll keep your hands from shaking." "I'm not shaking," she said. He drove another nail. "Not yet." She leaned against the post, arms crossed over a plain shirt he'd offered her from the trunk. It was too big, but it smelled of cedar and sweat and something calm. "You always work before breakfast? Fence doesn't care what time I eat." She watched him for a while, the way his shoulders moved with each strike, how his jaw tightened when the wood split slightly wrong. There was a rhythm to it, practiced but never easy. "I want to earn my stay," she said. "Put me to use." He paused, hammer still in hand, turned toward her. "I'm not keeping you. You gave me a place to sleep, fed me, didn't ask for anything." He leaned his weight on the post, considering her. "All right, you see those sacks by the shed? They're full of seed oats. I need 'em spread in the south field before the ground goes dry again." She didn't hesitate. "Show me how." They walked together, quiet again, but this time the silence felt like intention. He handed her a burlap sack and showed her how to toss the grain in an arc that wouldn't waste more than it planted. She tried, missed the angle, adjusted. He didn't correct her with words, just mirrored the movement beside her until she caught it. By mid-morning, sweat clung to her neck and her hands were raw, but she didn't slow. She moved across the dusty stretch of land like someone who'd never been taught to stop once she'd started. Abram watched her from the fence line, one boot propped on the lowest rail. "You worked land before?" he asked when she circled back for another sack. "My father ran a tobacco patch in Missouri until the river swallowed half of it. After that, we moved west. You ever miss it? Only the dogs." She wiped her brow with the back of her wrist. "And the way my mama used to sing while she boiled cane sugar." He shifted, eyes narrowing slightly. "She gone, 3 winters back. Fever took her in 3 days." He nodded once. "I lost my brother in a snowstorm near Snake River. Horse went through the ice." He followed. They didn't speak after that, but something passed between them, recognition, not sympathy. Loss that didn't need retelling to be understood. By afternoon, the oat sacks were empty and Evelyn's arms trembled from the strain. She leaned against the shed, breath shallow but even. "You're tougher than you look," he said. "I've been underestimated before," she replied. "It never lasts long." He stepped closer, close enough she could see the faint scar just beneath his right cheekbone. "You planning to keep moving?" She glanced toward the road, then back at him. "I don't know what I'd be moving toward. There's a place here for you if you want it." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes searched his face, not for charm or promises, just honesty. "I don't want to be taken in like some stray," she said. "I want to belong for the right reasons." "And what reasons would those be?" She took a slow step forward. "Because I wake up and want to see the way you look when you're fixing things. Because I don't feel like I'm pretending when I'm beside you." His hand brushed the edge of her sleeve. "You're not a woman I pity, Evelyn. You're a woman I see." She reached for him then, not with urgency but with certainty. Their hands met, fingers tangling like roots finding soil. The kiss that followed was deeper than the first, still gentle, but threaded with something steady and growing. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his chest. "I don't know if I believe in fate anymore." "I don't either," he said. "But I believe in what we choose." She looked up at him. "Then let's choose slow, let's choose real." He nodded, thumb brushing the curve of her jaw. "We'll make something that holds." That night, she helped him set the table with what they had, beans again, and salt pork and the last of the cornbread. They ate without rush, the air filled with the sound of crickets and the soft scrape of spoons on tin. When they lay down, she curled beside him, her head on his shoulder, the quilt pulled high. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and dry earth. Evelyn didn't dream of a church or a man who left. She dreamed of fence posts driven true, of oat fields taking root, of hands calloused by work and warmed by touch. And in that quiet space between midnight and morning, she knew she hadn't been saved. She had chosen. And she had been chosen in return. By the third morning, Evelyn stood at the wash basin with her sleeves rolled past her elbows, scrubbing the dirt from her arms with lye soap that stung the cuts along her knuckles. The sun hadn't yet cleared the ridge, but a steady gray light had begun to fill the cabin, casting long shadows across the plank floor. Behind her, Abram poured oats into a tin for the mare, his movements quiet but deliberate. "You always keep one horse here and the others down pasture?" she asked, not looking up from her hands. "She's with foal," he said. "Can't risk her slipping on the slope." Evelyn nodded, drying her arms on her skirt. "She's got a good eye on her. Watches everything, like someone else I know." She glanced over her shoulder, not smiling but not cold. "I've had reason to be cautious." He set the tin down and leaned against the doorway. "I got a letter yesterday from a man in Bozeman. Said he's heard there's grazing land opening near the Shields River. Wants to buy half my herd. You thinking on it?" "I'm thinking on what it'd mean. Less cattle, but the chance to pay off what I owe the mill and finally put a roof on the outer shed." Evelyn moved toward the hearth, crouching to stir the ashes back to life. "Hard to let go of what you've raised. Sometimes holding on too long ruins the rest." She added fresh kindling, the fire catching with a soft breath of flame. "If you sell what's left," he stepped closer, voice low, "me, this land. And what I've got growing here now." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she cracked 2 eggs into the skillet, the shells soft against the pan. The scent rose quickly, sharp and familiar. "I could take in some sewing," she said finally. There's women in town who'd pay decent for dresses mended clean. It wouldn't be much, but it'd stretch further with fewer mouths. I'd never ask you to work for my debts. You didn't. I offered. He moved behind her, his hand hovering near her back but not touching. You sure about this, Evelyn? She kept her eyes on the skillet. Man leaves you at the altar, folks start thinking you're fragile, like you might break if the wind hits wrong. I'm not brittle, Abram. I'm just tired of being looked at like I'm something that needs fixing. You don't, he said. She turned, the pan still in her hand. Then let me stand beside you like someone who's earned the right. He nodded once, slow. All right. Later that day, they walked the fence line together, a spool of barbed wire slung over Abram's shoulder and a hammer tucked into Evelyn's belt. The ridge beyond the pasture rolled wide and quiet, not a single cow in sight, the herd kept lower in the draw. They worked without waste. He drove stakes, she held steady and wrapped wire until her palms bore fresh welts. Did your father teach you this? He asked, tightening a loop. No. I watched the hired hands. They never noticed a girl quiet in the corner. You see everything, don't you? Most things that matter. He looked at her then, wind tugging loose strands of hair from the braid she'd tied that morning. You want to put roots down here? I wouldn't be standing in your field bleeding through cotton gloves if I didn't. Then I'll make sure it's a place worth staying. They walked back as the sun dipped low, each step slower than the one before. The cabin rose against the fading light, smoke curling from the chimney. Evelyn paused just short of the porch, her breath caught. What is it? He asked. She pointed to the cloth nailed to the frame, white muslin, stitched tight with red thread. That's mine. I found it under the seat wrap in your saddlebag, thought maybe it ought to hang. She stepped closer, fingers grazing the edge of her mother's embroidery, a sprig of pine stitched into the corner, small and plain. The last thing her mother had sewn before the fever took her. I thought I lost it. You didn't, he said. It just took a while to come back around. She turned, and this time her smile was quiet but sure. I'm not going anywhere, Abram. He reached for her, his hand warm at her waist. Neither am I. That night, long after the lamps were out and the fire burned low, Evelyn lay with her head on his chest, listening to the slow rhythm of breath and heartbeat. The quilt tucked around them smelled faintly of ash and pine smoke. Outside, the coyotes called, but distant. The night held. She reached for his hand beneath the covers, found it waiting. I don't need a church, she whispered. No, he said. You just needed someone who wouldn't run. She closed her eyes, holding to that truth like a promise. And for the first time since the bells never rang, she slept without waiting for something to fall apart. The spring rains came late that year, sweeping across the hills in slow, soaking waves that softened the hard edges of winter. Evelyn stood beneath the eave of the cabin with her skirt hitched above her ankles, watching the water run in narrow streams through the furrows they'd dug around the foundation. The air smelled of damp wood and turned soil. Somewhere behind her, Abram was oiling the hinges on the barn door, his quiet humming drifting faintly through the rain. She had learned the rhythm of this land over the past months, when to plant, when to wait, how to listen. Her hands had grown steadier, her eyes sharper. There was satisfaction in the work, in the way it gave back, even if only in small ways. Today the beans were pushing up through the rows, and the chickens had begun to lay regular. Abram joined her under the eave, shaking water from his sleeves. His shirt clung to his arms, streaked with grease and rain. Barnes holding, he said. That patch held better than I expected. You always sound surprised when something works. I've had enough things fall apart to be cautious. She leaned into him, her shoulder brushing his. It's not falling apart now. No, he said. It's not. They watched the rain in silence, the kind that didn't need filling. Later, she found herself in the storeroom, checking the sacks of flour and salt. Abram came in, wiping his hands on a cloth, and paused when he saw her counting. You keeping inventory? I'm thinking about winter, she said. We'll need more dried apples, maybe trade for them come September. He leaned against the doorframe. You think that far ahead? I do now. This place doesn't run on good intentions. He studied her, something unspoken in his eyes. "I've been thinking about building a second room, just a small one, enough for a bed and a window." "For who?" she asked. "For you, if you want it." She stepped closer. "I don't want a separate room, Abram." He didn't answer right away. "Then I know." She touched his chest, fingers resting over his heartbeat. "I'm not asking for more than what we already have, but if you're offering something larger, something that lasts, then I won't turn from it." He took her hand in both of his. "I've lived quiet for a long time. I didn't know what it meant to share this land, this life, but now I can't picture it without you." "Then don't." She smiled, not soft but certain. "Let's do it properly, let's make it legal." His breath caught just once. "You'd marry me?" "Yes." She didn't wait for ceremony or fancy words. She kissed him, slow and grounded, her hands warm against his neck. Outside, the rain lightened, and the sky broke open into streaks of pale gold. They rode into town a week later. Evelyn wore a clean calico dress, and Abram had shaved, though he left the old scar beneath his cheek untouched. They stood before the circuit judge in the mercantile's back room, beside a row of flour barrels and sewing needles. A marriage license was signed, witnessed by the shopkeeper's wife and a young freighter who happened to be in town for kerosene. There were no flowers, no music. Just two people choosing each other without hesitation. Afterward, they shared a meal of roast duck and potatoes at Mrs. Adley's boarding house. Evelyn ate slowly, savoring every bite. Abram couldn't stop looking at her, like he was still catching up to the truth of what they'd done. That night back at the cabin, they undressed by lamplight. Not rushed, not nervous. They had already lived beside each other through cold mornings and late chores, through the long hush of winter's end. There was nothing left to prove, only the quiet unfolding of a life already begun. Their bodies met with the easy familiarity of trust, and afterwards he held her with both arms as if anchoring her there. She pressed her face to his chest, listening to the steady rhythm beneath his skin. "I never thought I'd want to stay in one place," she whispered. "You stayed with me," he said. Years passed. The cabin grew by 2 rooms. Evelyn planted a row of lilacs along the front, and Abram built a sturdy bench beneath the tallest pine. They never hired help, though neighbors offered. They preferred to do things themselves, even if it meant longer days. Word spread that Mrs. Vaughn sewed the finest gussets in the valley, and folks came from Helena and beyond to leave mending with her. Abram's herd never grew large again, but it grew healthy, and he learned to trade wisely, no longer strangled by debt. They had a daughter in the 3rd spring. They named her Lark, for the way she cried at dawn like birdsong. Evelyn sat with her wrapped in a quilt stitched from old shirts, and Abram carved a cradle from pine with his own hands. Their days settled into rhythm, shared work, long evenings, the laughter of a child echoing through the trees. They grew older together, weathered and sure, with lines around their eyes and warmth in their hands. And every night, before the lamp was blown out, Evelyn would rest her head against Abram's chest and feel the same steady heartbeat that had never once turned from her. They had built something that held, something that would outlast even them.